Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mastering the Business of Yoga. I am really excited that you are here joining me for this episode. This episode is a fun one. I am joined by Carolyn Boldt. Carolyn is personally passionate about holistic health and wellness and an outspoken advocate that the environment of your space impacts your success. And she's been in the interior industry for 40 plus years. So she's got a lot of experience. And I'm really excited to dive into all things interior space because although I don't have a lot of experience with this, I know just personally for myself, when my interior space feels good, when it feels alive, when it feels open and clean, that's how my mind feels too. And so I think there's a lot that we can do in terms of our yoga studios, whether you own a traditional brick and mortar or you run a business out of your home and all that type of stuff. So we're going to dive into everything having to do with interior space. And I'm just really excited to learn. So Carolyn, welcome to the show today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Where are you joining me from today?
We are in the Atlanta, Georgia area, just north of Atlanta. So,
oh, awesome. Yeah. Atlanta has a special piece in my heart. It's a part of my story. I spent a year there. My husband was working down there. So spent a year teaching yoga, and it's where I started this podcast actually. So very cool.
Really, that's exciting. So we technically live in Gainesville, Georgia. If you know where that is, we actually live on the lake. We live in our dream home on the lake.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. Cool. We've been here just right at 2 years, right at 2 years. So
yeah, awesome. That's really cool to hear. And thanks for sharing that. And can we just start by diving into a little bit about you, who you are, a little bit about your background and where your passion for, everything interior space came from?
Interior space came from and holistic health came from. So yes, I'm a commercial interior architectural designer. So what that means is I have a 4-year degree and I've been practicing for 40 plus years and I have licenses and all kinds of stuff. So just to kind of give you that credential, but I got into it because I was 14 years old and my father worked for NASA, and he worked on advanced preliminary design. So he was working on the space station. So this was the 60s. Yes, I'm old. I'm a grandmother. But this was the 60s. And they were working on the space station 20 years in advance. And they had brought in an architect to help with the interior design of a zero gravity Earth orbiting space station. And so this architect was young and he was working on his thesis through NASA. And he would come over and visit, and I would sit in the living room and just be fascinated with these conversations. The general gist of the conversation that just drew me in is how your environment impacts you psychologically, and how most people, well, I was 14, I had no idea, but how most people don't understand how much their environment, their physical surroundings play a direct role on how they feel, how they act, how they respond, how they think. It's a very emotional, psychological impact. So what their goal is how do they keep these astronauts who are going to be in space for 30 days to years at a time from going crazy, all being in one space. And it was fascinating just talking about how they needed to create variety and some of those things. But that got me very, very fascinated with I already enjoyed art and I already enjoyed things of that sort, but just that your space does impact you. Go fast forward, when I studied design, I decided I wanted to do more commercial design because it was a business decision to use a designer as opposed to just an emotional decision in a residential to use a designer. And I could see a direct relationship between the profitability of a business and the design of their space way back when I was in school. So that's the focus of anyone in commercial design. That should be their focus, is that design of that space should be a direct relationship to what that business is trying to achieve. And there should be a return on investment for all of the design that's done in that space. And once again, I do architectural design, which involves, the walls, the doors, the lightings, the ceilings, and everything, as well as the things you traditionally think of design of color and artwork on the wall.
Yeah.
So wow. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I think that that's a really awesome, just an awesome career path to have taken. And what a cool way to get inspired into that and to follow through with that so many years after first getting introduced is very interesting. So thank you for sharing that. And
you're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah, I'd love to hear just, maybe we can start with people who have like traditional brick and mortar yoga studios or wellness businesses. Obviously, I think most people know that creating kind of the atmosphere within the studio is going to be important. Like there's a vibe when you enter a place, and that can either make somebody want to stay for more classes and buy a membership and become a long-term student of yours, or it can maybe make them not want to come back and look for another studio. So what do we even start to consider if we're thinking about, our physical studio space?
Well, I just want to say that the awareness of what you just said is step number one. So maybe in yoga, now we've worked with several yoga studios, and yes, everyone I've worked with, and they've traditionally been females, but they have come with an understanding that that environment is very much a part of the branding that they want for their studio. And to be able to vary that environment and things of that sort was always important to pretty much all of them. So number one is that awareness. And we also work, and if you look at my website, it's Chiropractic Office Design, which we work with a lot of chiropractors who don't understand that their environment is going to impact the way people react in their space. So that's why I want to say that's number one. But I think that what if we just start by talking about, you have to know what you want to impress, what you want to have that space be first. Is that where, can we start there? Are you good with that?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Okay. So let's assume that let's start with opening a new office, a new yoga studio. You're going to open a new yoga studio. So the very first thing you're going to want to do, as far as the space is concerned, is start to get really clear on who your ideal market is going to be. Who are you going to go after in that demographic that you're working in, or part of your, yoga studios, brick and mortar yoga studios are typically local. So who is that local surrounding that you're going to have? People don't tend to drive long distances to go to one, a series of yoga classes, maybe one or two, but I don't know how the market works exactly with all of that, but that's my awareness. So you want to know who your your ideal student is going to be, and what kind of things they're expecting and want out of that studio. What are they going after? So your marketing. So it goes back to all the way from who your brand is and what your marketing is. So if you know those things, then that becomes the umbrella around how you design your studio. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because sure.
You don't want to say you have a wonderful website and then they walk into your space and they're not congruent with each other. Do you know what I'm saying? Maybe one is I'm just going to use an example. One is very, dark and quiet and zen-y and stuff. And they walk into the studio and it's full of bright lights and full of nature and all of those. Both of those are viable yoga studios, right? But they don't match each other. So you want to make sure that your whole message all the way through of your branding is continued through that space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that that's, one of the reasons why, if you're doing, a website and a social media page and stuff, which I'm totally a big fan of doing, I feel like, getting a photographer to come and actually photograph your space and your teachers and your students is huge because that's where we have these discrepancies. Like when somebody goes to your website and there's a photo of a yoga studio, they're probably expecting that that's the yoga studio they're going to go to. Right. And then if they show up and the space is totally different, and especially if it's, like you were saying, kind of maybe like a darker vibe versus like that bright, white, clean vibe, that's going to be very different. And that's not necessarily like there's no good or bad with either of those. Both of those are great, like you said, but it's like the expectation of what people are interested in and looking for and just what they think that they're going into.
Exactly. And so I also want to say that what you just said, I can think of a yoga studio we did here in the Decatur area years ago, and she wanted to have a variety of atmospheres for the different types of classes that she was offering, for the different types of disciplines and stuff. So she had one that was we did lighting in the space so she could vary the lighting and create a lot of energy when she had a mommy baby yoga class. Do you follow me? Or she could do some variations and changes. So you can also think through that. Do you want some variety, and how do you integrate that variety into and a lot of times lighting is the easiest thing you can do, because the lower the light level, the quieter it is, the brighter the light level, the more energy it is. That's a very, very basic interior design principle. So that help?
Yeah, no, for sure. It's interesting to think about something as simple as like, maybe putting your lights on like a dimmer switch can make a huge difference in terms of the atmosphere you're creating. And it is kind of those little things like, oh, you walk into the room and it's, midday, lights are on. If there's windows, maybe all the blinds are pulled up or something like that. Just having that light kind of sets the tone for the energy versus maybe if it's like an evening, kind of more candlelit class, lights are dim, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's great.
Exactly. And then what you're saying is that that on your website, you want to express that message that we have creativity in our yoga, or that we have variety in our yoga, or you can find any kind of yoga you want here because we have, whatever the message is. I'm just throwing that out as opposed to just one type. So that's what you have to know first. What are you trying? What is your business goal? Because your design of your space should support your business goal. It's not about what you like and what's pretty, although your business goal should be what you like. You know what I'm saying? You don't want to practice yoga yourself in a space that's not environmentally appealing to you. So we tend to do that. So does that help?
Interesting. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. This makes me think about in my hometown in Canada, there's two yoga studios that I'm familiar with. And I feel like they're kind of like you started with, like their target market is really different. Like one has been around in the town for, 20 plus years. It's kind of got that like really homey vibe to it. The floors are kind of like a dark, rich wood color. The walls are like not a dark color, but they've got kind of, a darker tone. Like they're not just a bright white, and then a lot of windows. So you get a lot of natural light, and you walk in and it's got this kind of feel of just like you've walked into somebody's living room, like a well-loved living room.
Wow.
And the student base that goes there is an older clientele. There are young people that practice there and stuff like that. But in general, most of the members are a little bit of an older clientele, and they've been in this town for a long time, and they've been practicing at the studio through, changes of ownership, et cetera, et cetera. This other one's newer. It's owned by, two younger women in their 30s. And it's got kind of this more like, I feel like the best way to describe it is like an Instagrammable feel. Like they've got things where it's like you could come in and like take a cute photo with it, and lots of mirrors and lots of like fun colored merchandise and stuff that you can buy. And they do a lot of like bachelorette parties and that type of thing. And I feel like you can just tell that the clientele between the two studios is a little bit different, because the vibe and the atmosphere and everything about the interior space is a little bit different. And it works. Like both are great studios.
Exactly.
But when you walk in, you feel something different between the two.
So what you're telling me is they've done a good job with their interior space to support the clientele that they're trying to attract. Sounds like to me.
I think so. I just feel like with the one that's newer, like it feels to me like a space that is owned by like 30 something entrepreneurial women who are like you have a bachelorette party in town, like come and see us. We're the perfect place for this.
So I wonder, it would be interesting to see if they're meeting their target market, in their business itself, and making sure that, I'm sure that they are, because if you walk into a space, I'm going to use an example for you. So I'm not exactly sure what stores you have in Mexico, but I'm thinking you know enough about the United States to speak of like a Target. You have Target in Mexico? You have Target?
No, I wish we did. We don't even have Target in Canada.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, let's talk Walmart. You have Walmart.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Walmart's in all the places.
Walmart's everywhere. Okay. So when I teach classes to students at times, and we talk about Walmart versus a high-end designer store like a Giorgio Armani, right? So when we do interior design, for businesses, we think both of retail design is the philosophies, and that is when you walk into a space, do you want to purchase? Do you feel like you're going to want to spend money in this store, or want to spend money in this space? Does it match up with why you came in? Are you going to find what you're looking for? Okay. So that's retail design. And hospitality design is creating a culture in the space. So that's going to be people wanting to stay there and come back. And that's more like you go into your favorite restaurant to eat. And why do you go to that restaurant? Oh, we want the quiet, romantic atmosphere. Oh, we've got a baby now. We want to go someplace that we don't have to worry about it being quiet and romantic, if you follow what I'm saying.
Yeah,
so that's
for sure.
retail. That's hospitality design. So when we do business design, we bring in retail, and especially someone who's trying to promote client memberships or patient memberships or practice, student memberships or whatever. That's the culture you're trying to create.
Hey, yoga teacher. I just wanted to take a quick break from the podcast to share my favorite software platform with you, and that is Offering Tree. And there are 1,000,001 reasons why I love Offering Tree and why they are my number one recommendation for yoga teachers. And one of them is the pricing features. So if you've been teaching free yoga classes for a while, it might be time to start charging. I know when you hear that, you might cringe a little bit inside, and it can feel a little bit scary to take the leap to charging for yoga classes, but there's actually a way that you can bridge that gap and transition from teaching free to paid classes, and it keeps your yoga classes accessible for everyone. If you're teaching free classes, I recommend giving people the option to pay you. Hear me out. This is something that can seem really complicated, but it's actually really easy to set up an Offering Tree. With Offering Tree, you can offer both donation-based and sliding scale payment options for your yoga classes. That means that your students can choose an amount that feels right for them, or pick from a few different pricing options that you've laid out. Instead of receiving random PayPal or Venmo deposits as donations for your free classes, now everything is in one place with Offering Tree. Have I also mentioned that Offering Tree is super easy to use and super affordable? And that's just a few of the reasons why I love them. I've partnered with Offering Tree to offer a special discount to you. So if you're looking for a scheduling tool or website that's easy enough for you to set up yourself, go to offeringtree.com/MBOM for a 15% discount off 1 year of Offering Tree, or 50% off the first 3 months. Once again, that's offeringtree.com/MBOM. All right, now back to the episode.
So let me go full circle back to where I was. So you have Walmart, and then you have this high-end Giorgio Armani. So when you walk into Walmart, it was very intentionally designed the way it is to support the low price leader. You feel a little bit like you're in a garage sale. Things are a little bit all over the place. There's signs, advertising, prices everywhere. The color scheme is very bright. It's very primary. So it tends to focus on a lower economic market. And everything in Walmart was purposely designed to support Walmart the way it is. The really bright lights, all of those things. And if you think about when you shop in there, you don't think about what you dress. You don't think about, where you're going to get great service. You're okay because it's Walmart. Everything is congruent, is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. So that's the intention of when you think about your space. Go full circle over to a really high-end department store or high-end specialty store, and You don't know how much the price is. You do care about what you dress. The lighting has changed. The textures have changed. You expect immaculate service. So it's just all of those things are supported by that environment. And I could go on and on about that. So just that's the thing that you have to think about when you're designing a space for a yoga studio, along with having enough space. Enough space. So we've done a yoga studios in New York that I'm like, New York City, and they just are okay with not having the amount of space that they need here in Georgia to practice, if you follow what I'm saying.
Yeah. I feel like if you just live in like one of those kind of major cities like New York, LA, I don't know, I feel like Hong Kong is like this. There's probably a couple others where it's like, you just kind of get used to like living in smaller spaces with more people around you.
you just do. Yeah. You have that whole different perspective of your boundaries, your physical boundaries around you have gotten a lot smaller in those spaces. They say that's very true in Asia. People in Asia just have a smaller boundary of their personal space around them in their mind. So you're right. In New York City, I'm sure it happens that way too. So
yeah, for sure. Okay. So obviously finding like a space that feels good for what you're trying to attract, thinking about your target market, looking at lighting. What are some other kind of things that we can do in our studio? Obviously there's like, flooring, walls, and then the actual like decorations to create, or like the interior design to create that atmosphere. Can we dive into some of that stuff?
Yeah. So you were talking about, I've worked in yoga studios where the floor was just whatever was there. In other words, it was just luxury vinyl tile and people brought their mats. And I've worked in we've done yoga studios where the floor was very important and it's almost like a dance floor. You know what I'm talking about? The floor that actually is built with the structure and the cushions. So once again, what are you trying to accomplish and what are you trying to do? We did a hot yoga studio, and that's a whole different, you have to do all types of other finishes and things that have to do with that studio. But once again, it's what are you looking for? So the wide open space of a yoga studio and how big your classes are. Obviously, you've got a really big room and you don't have very big classes in that space. Trying to figure out how you can make that feel a little bit more intimate is probably important also. I don't know, give me some problems, because it's easy to talk about problems or specifics.
Yeah, I guess I just think of like, say somebody wants to, because I think hiring a designer is obviously a really good like way to kind of take what's in your mind and put it into, reality. But maybe somebody can't actually like, afford to hire a designer, or they can't find somebody that is a good fit, for whatever reason. So say somebody's like, okay, I've found the space. Okay. I know who my target market is. I know I want some like lights to dim. So I know I want that vibe. Maybe they've got like some nice curtains and stuff picked out so they can also work with the lighting there. Yes. How do you choose between like, having white walls versus like a beige wall versus a lilac wall? How do we pick a paint color in terms of, because obviously we want to be in line with our branding. So we want to think about what you were talking about with That's Walmart. We're not Walmart. So we're not going to do the primary colors like a bright yellow, a bright blue. We're not going to do that. But sometimes it can feel like, oh, this color on this little sample looks so good, but like, how do we know that's going to look good on the wall? How do you know that's going to look good? Yeah. How are we going to know that that's going to create the atmosphere we want?
So that's a really good question. So what we suggest to everyone as you're processing through getting opening a new space is start to create a vision board. Okay. Very similar to a business vision board that you might create for goals, but just very much focused on what are your ideas for how you want this space to feel. And finding other yoga studios, finding pictures. Pinterest is amazing. Just Pinterest alone, Google images and things like that, and start to gather them. What we do when we work with our clients is we tell them to go do that. And then we spend time talking to them about it to find the theme that's happening within those spaces. So if you don't have a designer to help you coach through your disconnected space, pictures if you need to find the theme in there. So let's just say you use the term. Let's just say you want a space that's very bright, very typically white. It's got some nature and it's got some green plants and things like that. You start to Google images of it and you can find those visions for yourself of what's going to happen, what you need to do. And then as you look at your space itself, you're asking me about paint. Just the biggest extreme of paint is to actually get little samples of the paint if you can and paint it on the wall and see how you like it. So I know that sounds, pretty basic, but when we do design for a client, we actually can order 8.5 by 11 pieces of that paint color, and we order several of them to make choices. So we'll go through 20 different whites as a designer to find the one white we really like, or the 2 or 3 whites we really like. And the reason I'm saying that is you want to put it on the wall because you understand that the light source is going to change the way that paint looks on the wall. Do you understand that?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. My dad built houses for a living growing up. He's retired now, but when I was younger, I got to paint my room.
Okay.
And gosh, I must have been like between 10 and 12. So, this is like a big deal in my like little kid world. And I know nothing about paint, but there was some rules. Like my dad was like, you can only go, on the paint swab color things. It had to be in like, the first 3. So the lightest colors, not the dark ones.
Well, that's good to know.
Like that. Yeah.
That was a good rule.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because I was little, right? I probably would have been like, oh, this color is really nice. But I remember just feeling like it was like such an immense pressure because I'm like, how can I know what this is going to look like once there's like, 4 walls painted and the lights are on it and the window shining on it? And I feel like I chose this like turquoise kind of like Easter egg type color, which I really did love as a kid. But thinking back on that, I just remember this like feeling this immense pressure of picking this paint color.
Well, you know what? We don't pick a paint color from a little, what is it, 1/2 inch high by, 2 inches wide little swatch on a paint fan either. We get the direction started, but we don't pick it from that. We pick it from the bigger pieces that and multiple ones. And we look at it under the light, the same light source that's going to be in that room. So natural daylight itself changes from a pink all the way to a blue and then back to a pink again, right? Pink, noon is pure white light from the sun. So if you're going to be in a room that's going to have a lot of natural light, you need to put those paints on the wall and look at it at different times that you'd actually have it open for practice. One of my favorite ones is taupe. If you remember the color taupe, it's kind of a difference, kind of a cross between a gray and a beige. And it's still a very popular color. It's gone a little bit cooler now than it was maybe, 10 years ago, but it's a popular generic color. That paint can turn pink really easy. So a lot of people have painted their walls and it's pink during a certain amount of time. Or if you have anything with a red base in it at all, believe it or not, taupe does have red base. It can start to turn pink in your morning time and your nighttime. So you just have to, knowing the source of your light. And then there's also different sources. Obviously, LED lights can change. It's called Kelvin is the color temperature. And it can change from a warm light to a really blue, bright light. And that'll change the way that paint looks or any item.
Okay. Yeah. Lots to consider there. And especially when you said 20 whites, I was like, oh, wow. It's not just like, I want a white wall. It's like,
I want a white wall. It's 20 white. So the steps I would tell you is find the pictures. Let's just say you want the white room. You find pictures of white rooms that are white yoga studios that you like. And then you start to look at the different elements in there that make that room work. So it'll be the paint on the wall. It might be, I just mentioned, you might have plants. What are the things in that room that are making that come together and work? And then the other thing you would look at is what proportion of those things do you need? So if you have a big room, let's just say you have a 20 by 40 room, you want to make sure if you want some greenery in it, you've got enough greenery in it. Do you know what I'm saying? Just one little plant in the corner is not going to give you the vibe that space that you may have picked.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Like if you've got, especially like a large, maybe more traditional yoga studio, having like one or two succulents is not going to give like the vibe of having plants in the space.
Exactly. So look at the proportion. And then what we were talking about paint, start with the little paint fan. Look at the different paints that you think you may want. Take it. I mean, you can get bigger swatches if you go to a paint store. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they'll even give you a whole painted piece. If you can find a designer, they can order you 8.5 by 11 sheets of that paint. I don't know if you can get that from a paint store or not. I don't know if the paint stores you can order it or not. I'm going to use an example. We use Sherwin-Williams a lot. Mm-hmm. And Sherwin-Williams paint stores, that's a good question. I don't know if you can go to the paint store and say, can I get big swatches of this paint? That would be good to know.
Yeah,
but at the very least,
but you can get like the little ones at least, or maybe like a little sample of it. I like the idea of like painting a couple beside each other and then deciding on the color you like from there.
Exactly. So go from there, test it, just test it. I mean,
yeah.
We don't, like I said, we don't pick from little bitty pieces, and we never pick,
good to know.
We never pick a finish from an online picture,
right?
Ever, because if you know anything about monitors, they're going to change the way the color looks. Also, there's a variation in that color. So we never pick carpet, we never pick upholstery, we never pick any of that stuff just from a picture.
Yeah, for sure.
We get the real piece. And you should be able to get the real piece of most of them. So does that help?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for that. And so one of the things I'm curious about is kind of diving into the interior space. And obviously, like yoga studios are pretty unique in that we actually don't need that much because most of the space needs to be open for people coming in. So I love the idea of plants. Plants are something that, I really like in a space, and especially in like a yoga studio space. But what other things should we consider when it comes to like how we actually decorate a studio?
So form follows function. I'm going to speak first. So the very first thing you need to do is figure out what functional things you need in that space. So I'm thinking about some of the studios we've done. They actually have a little entrance area where people check in, they wait between studios or between classes. Do you need that? Do you need that type of a separated environment or not? So that may be something you consider in your space. And if you do need a separated environment, is there a check-in area? Is there a business desk? What's happening functionally that you need? So you've got to think through all of that. Or is it just going to be just a big room that you come into and everyone checks in on a notepad, and then you have cubbies for people to put their stuff? It can be that simple. So having done both, I know we've done more yoga studios that were part of a bigger office. So they didn't need that check-in. They didn't need it because the people could come in and check in at the front desk and then go back into the yoga studio on their own. So think about functionally what you need. That's my bottom line. What functionally do you need for this to physically work? And then decide where that's going to flow the best in your practice and how you want that flow to happen in your space. And then let me see what else you would do, because you're right, it's a big wide open space. So you start there and look at the lighting, look at the layout of how you can put all the yoga mats in there, where the spacing of all of that is, how many people you can really get into the space. I know that one's probably the biggest, is how many people you can get in the space, and feel comfortable with how close or far apart you want the space, the mats to be to function. Mm-hmm. I think about, like I was talking to the one in New York that we laid out, they were comfortable with all the mats being like 2 feet apart. Well, if you think about 2 feet, you're touching each other when you have your hands out and you're doing something, right? Yeah. So you've got to stagger them and do some stuff. So I don't know if that helps. Probably a whole little layout course would be viable, but
yeah, no, I think that is really helpful though, just to think about, like in your space, how are things going to flow? Like what's the flow of people And, how can you make sure that your space is functional with that? And is there going to be any like bottlenecks for people coming in and out? And is the space they're waiting in something where they feel welcome to wait,
Exactly.
and then kind of decorate from there. And I actually feel like with yoga studios, like less is more in terms of, I guess, like the design and stuff. I don't think you need like a lot of photos on the wall and a lot of decorations. I think just keeping it really simple and clean is, at least that would kind of be my preference.
Yeah.
And let kind of like the teachings, really kind of come into the space.
Right. And just really, when I think of yoga studios, and once again, I think of the yoga studios, I've been to that home-based yoga studio, like you were saying before, for years, because it was in her home. She had the basement of her home finished out, and it was her home. There really was a fireplace in the space, what I'm saying, in the downstairs area that she was in. And she kept the lights low. And of course, with yoga, the aromas in the space, any kind of essence of smells or essential oils or anything can really add to that whole essence of what you're trying to create into the space. I've been in yoga studios where they don't do music. I've been in yoga studios where music is important. So all of those things you're thinking through, the sound system can be extremely important in a yoga studio, and making sure that it's the right space. But am I going where I needed to go? So thinking about, to me, in a yoga space, for me, I like the brighter, lighter spaces. And I do the darker ones because I tend to want to fall asleep. I don't know. I need the energy. I need so yeah, I'm one of those that do my yoga online now. So, and I have a room in my house that's a lot of windows, and I have my little iPad set up, and I have my teacher I go to all the time, and that's where I do my yoga. So it's not nearly as wonderful as being in a class and having an instructor. But yeah, when I moved, and it was in the middle of COVID, that's kind of what I've gotten used to. But
yeah, I certainly don't think you're alone with that. And that leads to, I want to ask you about setting up kind of the online space, and more thinking about like from the teacher's perspective. I mean, you can see my video right now. I'm just in like kind of a blah, not really decorated room. Like, to me, this isn't like the greatest background if I was going to teach yoga here. Like, I feel like I'd want something a little bit more. So if we're kind of, maybe not having like a full on brick and mortar space that somebody's coming into, but we are setting up a space that needs to be like welcoming, what are some things we can do just like to create that sort of that vibe with even just like our backgrounds?
So, well, look at you just answered your question. Is look at your background. Do you want to practice yoga in this space? So if you think about where you want to practice yoga, so I can think of, gosh, it goes all over the place, right? So I think about yoga classes that are outside. If you have the beauty of an outside environment and you want to create that type of vibe for your practice, and it's pretty outside and it's natural. But if you're outside and you're seeing this old beat up fence and kids' toys in the corner, and that's not, you're creating the background is your presence of what you're trying to do for that space. I think of a yoga teacher that I followed for years, and you can tell she just has one area with she's probably in an older house. She has a wooden floor. She has a window behind her, and she's got a couple of plants on the side, and her whole visual is very focused on her mat. There's no instructions. There's no distractions or anything else. It's just there's not a lot of art. It's just very simple. So I think in my mind, anytime you're teaching people, you don't want them to be really distracted from what all's going on around you too much, not too busy. It's your impression. Make it feel like you're in your studio,
Yeah, no, I like that. And I think the tip of like not making it too busy is important. Like, even if your personality is a bit more like maybe colorful, bubbly, and you want that to come through, maybe the best way for that to come through is like through your words, through your personality, because I do feel like it's like, we're working off these kind of tinier screens, and it can be really overwhelming when there's like a lot coming through the screen. It's already, a lot on our nervous system to kind of take in things just like through our eyes and stuff like that, constantly through our screens, right? We do everything on our screens now. But I like the idea of it being, like about the teacher and about the teacher, showing the yoga to the students, and, you can create a really nice, clean space and that type of thing. And then also, something you'd want to practice with, I think is a good tip also.
Yeah, place you'd want to practice in. Yeah, because you're going to be practicing while you're teaching. So, and you want to make sure that you're comfortable with that too. I wouldn't even begin to understand how you technically set up the visual, the camera and all of those things I'm sure that's a whole nother, somebody's got to do that, because that's also important. Can you hear what can you hear what the instructor is saying clearly? Can you visually see what they're demonstrating? To me, those are course techniques. And I've watched instructors where I couldn't do that, so I didn't watch them anymore.
Yeah, same. Yeah, it's hard. Like it sucks too if you've decided to do an online class and you're excited about it. You've set up your own space, and then it doesn't really matter how nice their space looks if you can't like hear and see them properly. So yeah, that's a really good point and whatnot. Obviously, we're not going to cover that on this episode. We do have other episodes on, the technical side of setting up an online space. But I think just thinking about, keeping it clean, keeping it something that you would enjoy practicing with, keeping it simple, and then, making it so it's not distracting, like somewhere where like maybe your dog's not going to walk by, or like, your partner is not going to walk by in the background, or you can't see the door when like, I don't know, Amazon rolls by and drops off a package, that type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. All those things. And you also said, the technical aspect of being able to see you obviously involves the light source and your lighting and making sure that that's going to work for you. But that's kind of getting into the technical. How do you set up the lighting so that it's, not natural room lighting may or may not work on a video, it just.
Yeah. I mean, it gets complicated because it really depends on your space. And obviously we can't go into the details of every type of space. So I think that is something for people to consider when you're choosing your space, like where is going to work for you in terms of like it being quiet and you being able to set up at the hours of the day that you need to teach. But then, probably not being in like a dark basement is like not the best, right? Unless you're going to use like a ton of artificial lighting and whatnot. So yeah, lots to consider with that. But I think we covered some good stuff overall that I think gives people some good stuff to think about. And the last thing I wanted to ask you about, Carolyn, just because this is more the situation for me. And I think that this is the same for a lot of yoga teachers and studio owners. We have our studio spaces, we have our teaching spaces, but we also have like our personal workspaces. Like when we're doing our marketing or writing our email newsletter or scheduling our social media, we're sitting at a space. How can we use like the principles of interior design just to maybe make our space a little bit more like alive? And, like you said, right from the beginning, like the psychology aspect of this is real. Like when we're in a space that we feel good, we, feel better, i.e. if we're in a space that we enjoy working in, we're probably going to work better. So do you have any tips for how we can kind of set that up?
Well, do you have I'm just going to talk physically a minute. You need to make sure you're working at home and you're sitting at a computer. Do you have the right chair? Do you have the right desk height? Do you have the right computer? Is it at the right height for you? Getting yourself comfortable. Those are things that a lot of home-based businesses don't think about. I know all of our designers are remote. We've worked virtually since we started this thing. I've got designers in South Carolina and in Colorado and other parts of Georgia. And one of the things that I know about them is a couple of them love to work on laptops. They love to work on laptops, but a laptop ergonomically is not really the best thing in the whole world. So just encouraging that you're physically comfortable and can be comfortable is my point of all of that. Then as far as the surroundings, it's the hardest thing about working in your home office is it can get really cluttered. and there's no one there to see it. Do you know what I'm saying? Unless you have, when you're in an office, in a common office, let's say, you don't want to be embarrassed when your colleagues walk in and you have junk everywhere. I know.
You're not going to leave like 4 empty Starbucks cups just like sitting on your desk.
Yeah.
And I'm not speaking about me. I'm 100% talking about my husband here.
So it's like what you're comfortable with, and I'm just going to say this. Some people can be comfortable in that. They don't think about it, but you have to be comfortable for you. And I don't like a cluttered desk. That's just my mind. And it's where I am. So my husband, who's basically in the other room, he likes piles all around him that he can grab at any point, and that drives me crazy. So all I'm saying to you is you've got to design for you in your office. You've got to design for you and what will be good for you. But good ergonomic seating, spend the money on a good chair. You're going to be there a lot. Spend the money on, your monitors high enough and all of those so that you're, sitting and you're where it needs to be. Your monitor should be basically at eye level and you shouldn't be hunched over. And those type of things would be the biggest thing I think that happens in a home office is people don't pay attention to that. And, but if you're not on videos all the time, your surroundings can be the middle of a kitchen. Do you know what I'm saying? If that's what you need to do. I know that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think obviously like when you're working from home, you do the best you can do. And not all of us have like an extra room in our house that we can just turn into an office. And so if it's the corner of the kitchen table and maybe you supervise kids doing homework while you're doing some work, like that's a beautiful thing. Like we work with what we have. But I think if you do have that, that space that you can kind of, even a little space that you can kind of make your own, I think that can be something that's really helpful. And I just wanted to add, because I work with a laptop. I mean, prior to having a baby, my husband and I were traveling pretty much full time. I actually have like a laptop stand. I just have one off Amazon. Excellent. I think it's $20 or something. It's called a neck stand, and it kind of just opens up sort of like an accordion, I guess, to become a stand. And then goes really small. I don't know if I've ever talked about that on the podcast before.
Does it raise your laptop up so that your laptop screen?
Okay. Yeah. So I'm like looking directly at my screen right now on a laptop, on a MacBook Pro. And then I have an external keyboard. So I just have a Mac keyboard and then a mouse. And so that makes it's not a perfect setup by any means. It's still working off like a 13-inch screen, which is pretty small, but it definitely, if you are somebody who has a laptop or maybe you're wanting to be more portable and stuff like that, I feel like this is a pretty good, like affordable setup.
That's a great idea. Something that you could take, because the beauty of a laptop is the versatility and the flexibility of going wherever you need to go and do whatever you need to do. But if you're working on it, 4 or 5 hours a day, you're right. You can, I know when we travel, we work off of our laptop and I can feel it, before the day's over that I'm all.
Yeah. I find especially like not using, like if I go work at a cafe or something, sometimes I'll leave like my stand and my keyboard, at home and just take my laptop, but I always bring my mouse because I feel like that's the biggest thing. Like using like the trackpad on the laptop is like so hard on my wrist. I feel like just having a mouse, like slow. Even if you want to, and even if you want to just like start with that, you can buy mice like pretty affordably. And it's such a game changer in terms of just like having a more ergonomic space. And then, I love the idea of just like making your space kind of feel what you need. My husband's very similar to what you described. It drives me crazy. I don't even like to go into his office space because I feel like there's just things all over the place. That makes me feel very scattered, but I don't know. It's how he works. So he probably feels something when he comes into my office space and everything's neat and tidy and has a place.
It feels like so I think the thing that we go full circle with a minute is that spaces can make you feel a certain way. Do you know what I'm saying? And you just said something is that when you design your personal space, your only filter is you and how you feel. And so you need to be aware of it. That's the biggest part. It's just awareness of it, of being like, you feel like, hey, I like the way I feel in this space. And so if you're going to be in it for very long, you should enjoy the way you feel in the space. Is it cluttered, or is it full of broken things, or is it full of the light doesn't really work, or the chair doesn't feel comfortable? Those are the things that I would say focus on changing, as quickly as you can. And then the other piece of that is that it's your filter. It's not your husband's filter. So when you're designing your yoga studio, you're trying to imagine your perfect student's filter and what do they want. And so you design for that.
Yeah, cool. Okay. I love that. That's great. This has been a really awesome conversation. You've shared so much good stuff. Is there anything else you want to leave listeners with? Any other, tips or final pieces of wisdom in terms of spaces and whatnot?
So just that, the design of your space is going to impact your success. So be very intentional about it. And our website is chiropracticofficedesign.com. We focus on any kind of holistic healthcare type of practice at all. And it's obviously our majority is chiropractors. Our name would not be that way. But we do have a lot of resources on there, a lot of free resources. There's some free resources that I offered to the yoga group. I gave you a link that you can go to. But one of the ones that you may want to do for those, we've been talking about starting a practice, but the ones that have an existing practice is I have a 5-point designer checklist of just kind of those questions, even for a home office you could use, of almost like an evaluation of these 5 points that you can use as almost like a worksheet, and where you just use it to kind of help you see these are the first 5 things a designer would look at. And they have to do with clutter, they have to do with lighting, they have to do with dated material, dated things, worn out stuff, things of that sort. So that could be very helpful. And that's just a free resource that's available.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. We'll make sure that there's links to all of that in the show notes. And yeah, thank you so much for your time today, Carolyn. This has been really great.
Well, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomeyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomeyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.